It's Thursday, February 27th. I'm Logan Moody, and this is the Contrarian. Today I'll be talking about Nvidia and the big news that they just had yesterday, beating earnings, and then their stock selling off heavily today. Kind of the opposite reaction of what one might expect. I'll also talk about just appearing, to be a bearish sentiment overall in the market right now, a very pessimistic kind of mood that's taken over. Definitely going to touch on that, as well as Bitcoin and crypto falling off of a cliff. Just talk a little bit about that. Also, what the bond market might be telling us right now, with some recent movements in that market that's kind of telling a different story. So first off, touching on Nvidia, this is definitely the biggest news in the last few days. Nvidia is one of the three biggest companies in the world. By market cap, they were temporarily the number one company, taking over Microsoft and Apple for the number one position in the world, in terms of most valuable publicly traded company. But they are definitely still up there even after their recent sell-off. But big news, I would say, on Nvidia's earnings is the fact that they continue to beat their own guidance. They continue to raise guidance for the upcoming quarters, and so their business continues to expand in terms of overall demand for their artificial intelligence chips. Of course, Nvidia has had just monstrous returns, when it comes to their GPUs, all these AI-focused chips that just have massive profit margins. And as a result of that, the earnings on this company have just exploded in the last 2 years. The valuation has as well. And this, has thrust Nvidia into the limelight. It's probably the most talked about company right now. And it did sell off big on this news, which is very counterintuitive. You would think if Nvidia was to beat earnings, the stock would go up. If it was to underperform earnings, therefore the stock should go down. But it appears that there are, it's kind of the last two earnings we actually saw this same thing happen, where they would beat earnings, they would raise guidance, both very bullish, indications, one would think. And then the next 2 or 3 days, the stock sold off. And so, it's my guess that in the coming days, coming week, Nvidia really starts to power higher, just based on looking at prior earnings. It typically had kind of that same sell-off behavior immediately after the earnings report, but then a week later, it was, 5 or 10% higher than prior to the earnings call. So it would be my own personal expectation that this sell-off in Nvidia is going to be pretty short. Of course, the rest of the market did sell off heavily today as well. I would just say overall sentiment has suddenly shifted to being bearish. In terms of why exactly, it's a little unclear. It's not like there's the yen carry trade concern going on that was, causing that sell-off that we saw last August. Around early August 2024, there was the whole concern of the yen carry trade essentially causing a lot of forced liquidation. It doesn't seem like we have much forced liquidation going on in terms of hedge funds or other investors just having to sell their positions. Back in August, it was caused by the Japanese yen essentially suddenly strengthening against the dollar, the cost of borrowing in yen going up, and therefore, just a lot of forced selling had to take place. And that caused a lot of concern about a larger contagion, spreading effect of that. And that ultimately didn't happen. It was a fairly contained sell-off last August. But, right now it doesn't appear that we have any issue kind of like that going on. I would say it's probably more so just the sentiment almost had to be reset eventually, in terms of everyone kind of shifting to being more skeptical, bearish of course, and then acting on that, so essentially selling some of their positions, getting more heavily into cash. Just a lot of people, I think, have recently seen headlines like Warren Buffett is getting heavily into cash and things like that, which, Buffett is definitely worth paying attention to, of course. He's gotten, into cash at some opportune times in the past. He's not always great with market timing and things like that, and nobody is, quite frankly, but I think just seeing headlines like that has made a lot of people suddenly turn bearish. And of course, the media is, constantly saying that Trump's tariffs and everything like that is going to fuel more sticky inflation going forward and everything. I will point that bonds are actually starting to tell a different story than the sticky inflation story. Bonds have actually decreased in yields fairly substantially in the last couple weeks, and so it appears that the bond market is beginning to, return to normalcy, one could say, or return to a soft landing type of expectation in terms of starting to see slowing economic growth. It's just starting to see lower levels of inflation, and therefore investors are getting more into bonds. And of course, this could be somewhat of a safe haven type of move as well, just with some investors getting out of stocks, getting more into bonds. Maybe not getting into cash, but definitely getting into bonds and still getting a high yield on their cash. And so bonds are kind of indicating a different story than what the media might be saying right now with regards to tariffs and higher inflation going forward. So the bond market is very interesting to see. I will be watching that closely in the coming weeks, just to see if rates continue to fall across the board like they have been. I think that would be an indication that inflation is really going to start slowing here pretty soon. Of course, today actually we did see a revision to the downside in terms of Q4 economic growth of last year, and so that's probably also another indication that, as growth is slowing, as overall economic activity is slowing, it would be expected to see inflation slow as well, just as overall demand in the economy slows. And of course, I like to talk about just the economic effects that more free energy policy, like what is currently going on in the Trump administration, will have. It'll definitely help to alleviate a lot of the concerns we saw about higher oil and gas prices and everything like that. So I do expect that to have a gradual effect at easing inflation as well. And then, of course, you can't ignore the whole efficiency initiative going on within the government as well. I would say if those kinds of efforts continue and they're effective at cutting overall government spending and overall fraud and waste, which so far they've found a few larger sources of that here and there, but if it can really be a large cut to the overall deficit spending, that does restore a lot of trust in terms of investors, whether they be domestic or foreign, suddenly seeing bonds as more attractive because suddenly the U.S. is being more fiscally responsible. So that would be, another indication that bonds would become, just more of a desirable investment than what they have been in the last 2 years. Of course, I can't ignore what's happened in crypto and Bitcoin. Bitcoin has fallen off a cliff, sort of. It fell under 100 grand, it fell under 90 grand. It's around $82,000 right now, so it's probably about 21%, 22% from the all-time highs it hit. And if anything, this was kind of a predictable move, in my opinion. It's a funny story, but about 2 weeks ago, I had two friends of mine come up to me and essentially say, I forget how it exactly came up, but they said that they had bought Bitcoin for the first time. And these are people who had previously never been in crypto, and one of them had actually been fairly skeptical of it. And I think it was just kind of the overall crowd thinking mentality took hold of them. It was about 2 or 3 weeks ago when Bitcoin was still in the news. It was, over $100,000 and everything like that. Tons of people were saying it would go straight to, whatever price target they were saying, $1 million, 13 million, whatever. And so a lot of people did buy into Bitcoin. Unfortunately, it's looking like that was the top. Whether it remains a very long-term top, I don't know. It's possible that when, because I do believe that the rest of the stock market does turn up here pretty soon, but it's possible that when liquidity does return to the markets, that Bitcoin could catch a bid with everything. But, it's also possible that it kind of is due for just a larger correction overall, and it might turn into a much deeper correction than what most people are thinking. So, I don't engage in crypto at all. I don't own anything either way, shorting it or going long or anything. But it's just interesting to observe what's going on in the crypto space right now. Essentially, most of the gains after the election have been erased. I would maybe say that one of the kind of under the surface reasons for Bitcoin and crypto to be crashing is just with the increased scrutiny that's being brought to the industry. Previously, there was a lot of skepticism, pushback around Bitcoin, but it wasn't like Tether, this fraudulent organization that pumps lots of fake dollars into Bitcoin and crypto. It wasn't like Tether was facing a lot of scrutiny, but it's looking like Tether will actually have to face that or just completely be banned in the United States, which would be huge. It'd be huge news for crypto. Essentially, you have Tether right now minting all of these fake stable coins, which, it's Tether. It's it should be a one-for-one conversion for dollars, and, they've never been audited. There's no verification that they actually have the bonds and the cash that they say that they do to back all of their stable coins, and they do mint Tethers in very extremely strong correlation with the price action of Bitcoin especially, and crypto as a whole. So, it's no mystery that Tether does inject lots of fake liquidity into crypto as a way of boosting overall enthusiasm in that space. Because if you can manipulate a financial number of an instrument to go up, the whole number go up kind of story, that does take place. And so with more increased scrutiny on this, the whole dynamic there with Tether might go away, and with that finally gone, I will be curious to see what, if anything, is left in crypto in the long run. So, also I will be watching what happens in crypto in the coming weeks. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about Nvidia, of course, overall bearish sentiment, bonds, and then Bitcoin and everything like that. So let me know what all of you think about all of these topics in the comment section below, and I hope to see all of you again.